MedEvidence, where we help you navigate the real truth behind medical research with both a clinical and research perspective. Now, let's get the truth behind the data.
Dr. Michael Koren joins us here live in the studio. We appreciate him taking time out of his busy schedule. He, of course, a medical doctor, a cardiologist, and medical researcher, and he lives right here with us. You could live anywhere in the world, and you choose to live right here.
In Northeast Florida.
Paradise, right?
St. Johns County, absolutely.
Yeah. So other doctors that you meet at international conferences in Barcelona and all over the world, do they say, why do you live in Northeast Florida? Why don't you live in New York or Los Angeles?
It's funny. I used to get that question a lot 30 years ago when I moved down here. Less so now. People actually know us.
Yeah.
I think I told you this story, but I'll share it with the audience, is that I was at the European Society of Cardiology meeting in Barcelona, as it turns out, in September. And I went to a number of sessions. It was fabulous. They actually do a really, really good job of figuring out different ways of expressing the data and sharing information with other doctors from all over the world. In fact, one of the settings was a nightclub setting. So they actually set up the lecture stand as if, it was a nightclub, and the lecturer is actually a DJ. And the whole thing looks like you're in a bar and this cool kind of club setting. So anyhow, I went there just to see what the vibe was, and they did some neat things, and they were sharing some actually really good data. But the best lecture of that entire sequence was by Dom Angelillo, who was at UF Jacksonville.
Wow.
And we didn't know that we were each there in Barcelona, and he gave this fabulous lecture on what to do about people that have had a history of a stroke and need anticoagulants, but also have bleeding complications. And he did a fabulous job, and I was so proud. I said, this is why I'm from Jacksonville, because we have really smart doctors here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, once again, that's Dr. Michael Koren with ENCORE Docs. And if you're interested in participating in some medical research, clinical trials, they have those going on right now. Some of them based right here in St. Augustine. They have offices at the Whetstone Building near Flagler Hospital. Go to EncoreDocs.com for more information. That's ENCORE Docs.com. Earlier in the week, Dr. Koren joined us live on the radio in the morning, on Monday morning, and we were talking about diabetes issues because this is National Diabetes Awareness Month, right?
Well, I thought it was day on Monday, and I guess it expanded to week, and now it's month?
Yeah, I think based on just how good a job you did on Monday.
I see.
They just figured they would ride it for a while.
All right.
So talk to us a little bit about diabetes. We hear about it being an epidemic tied somewhat to the obesity and epidemic here in the United States. What does that mean when we hear that word, that it's an epidemic?
Sure, it's a great question. So the incidence of diabetes has increased dramatically over the last 50 years, coincident with the increase in the overall weight and the levels of obesity of the population. In fact, estimates have shown that on a population level, that the amount of diabetes has doubled every 15 years or so.
Wow. Over
the last 50 years. So basically, diabetes, and I'll get into some of the details about that in a second, is a condition in which your body can't metabolize sugar the way it should. And in a lot of cases, in most cases, in fact, your body can't use insulin as well as it should. So we often use the term insulin resistance. And I'll get into a little bit more detail momentarily. But for most of us, it's because we're overweight. And we're overweight. We overwhelm the ability of our body to process sugars and other carbohydrates, and that leads to complications.
Yeah. How often, or, I guess just making a guess, if you will, what percentage of people could have their diabetes eliminated if they adjusted their weight?
Oh, over 50%.
Wow.
Yeah. But let me just get into a little bit more detail about that. So the word, and we like to share little trivial facts, so I'll just share some of those with you. So the word diabetes actually refers to the phenomenon of peeing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So as you break it down to the Greek words, it means to pass a lot of urine, basically.
Right.
And there's different forms of diabetes. So the form that occurs younger in life, typically during the teenage years, is often called type 1 diabetes. And that's related to the fact that your body can't make enough insulin.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you can actually be thin. And in that case, you may have a situation where you need to have an insulin pump or something that provides insulin.
Mm-hmm.
And insulin is life-saving under those circumstances because your body just can't make it.
Right.
There's some very, very interesting elements of type 1 diabetes that I won't get into necessarily, but that's one condition.
Mm-hmm.
But the much, much, much more common form of diabetes is called type 2 diabetes. And that would typically occur, starting in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and sometimes later. It's almost always associated with being overweight. And that's where your body can make insulin, but it can't make enough to keep up with the needs. And your body becomes resistant to the effects of insulin. In that case, insulin isn't actually necessary to manage the condition. And there may be some arguments that insulin isn't necessarily good to manage the condition. But instead, we have to figure out ways to make your tissues more sensitive to the effects of insulin. And probably the most important way to do that is to lose weight.
Wow. That's Dr. Michael Koren. If you're just hopping in your vehicle, we're talking about diabetes. I don't think there's anyone listening who doesn't have diabetes either in their family or they themselves are not personally dealing with it. So this is a very timely topic. And it is a time when we should pay some attention to eating and all that. We're heading into the big eating season, Doctor.
We are.
I saw we had some data last week that said the average American average adult American will consume 7,200 calories next Thursday on Thanksgiving Day.
Really?
So that's the average.
Wow.
So that means some of us, not you, of course, but others might be consuming 1,200, calories. Maybe even more than that, like 12,000 calories.
Well, maybe we should make a deal. Like every other year, I'll fast so you can eat 1,500 calories, 15,000 calories.
That's right, 15,000
yeah,
calories.
will that work?
Oh, gosh. And you would think that it's turkey too, right?
Yeah, it's not the turkey. We've had this discussion. When it comes to diet, if you eat the core foods, you tend not to get into trouble. It's all the stuff that's on it.
Oh, so, stuffing.
Yeah, there you go. Stuffing is a problem.
Pumpkin pie.
The gravy and the pumpkin pie. And
what's your favorite Thanksgiving food item, Dr. Koren?
Turkey's pretty darn good.
Yeah, you like the turkey, huh?
Yeah,
are you a sweets guy? Not really, though, huh?
Not huge, no.
Yeah.
I like. The only thing I would say is I do like sweet potatoes, but I don't put a lot of stuff on them. So you take like an actual sweet potato, not all mashed up, just like a real sweet potato.
I like that too.
Cut it in half, slice it down the middle, and like most people put butter and cinnamon and sugar and all this other stuff on it. I don't want that. Just give me a spoon.
Yeah, a spoon and a nice roasted sweet potato.
There you go.
I like that too. So backing up a little bit, we see all these ads on television for various drugs that you could take to help with diabetes. They announce these. Some of them apparently even have some weight loss benefits.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. And one of the reasons that I've become knowledgeable in this area and been involved in this area is because we have tested diabetes drugs for over 20 years now. So I'll go into a little bit of history because I think it's actually fascinating. So the treatment of diabetes actually started with the discovery and isolation of insulin. And so going back 100 years, insulin was discovered actually in Toronto, Canada. And and when I say discovered, it was isolated so that could be used as a therapeutic. And they were able to take insulin, inject people, particularly with type 1 diabetes, that could make insulin and actually save their lives. So that was the beginning of treatment of diabetes, and insulin was really the only therapy for a number of years. And then following World War II and the discovery of newer molecules, we had some basic treatments for diabetes called sulfonylureas. And they were the standard for maybe 20 years or so. And we started to get to a point where the question came up, okay, well, in type 2 diabetes, we definitely have some things that can control very high blood sugars. But when we use these things, we run into the problem of very low blood sugars. And that can cause serious problems, including, remember, Klaus van Bülow back in the day, who his wife decided to treat his diabetes very aggressively, and he ended up in hypoglycemic coma more than once.
Right.
In the New York hospitals where I happened to practice at the time, coincidentally. But nonetheless, but the medical debate was out there about whether or not there was a downside to being too aggressive at the treatment of diabetes. So the Brits, who tend to be good at clinical research, got together and they created something called the UKPDS, which is the United Kingdom Prospective Diabetes Study. And it was a nice trial that was done, organized over about 20 years, about 5,600 patients or so. And they asked the question, is more aggressive diabetes care better than less aggressive diabetes care? So instead of just trying to make sure that you don't have super high levels and make sure you don't have super low levels, they're saying, okay, let's bring the overall glucose level down and see if that reduces the known complications of retinopathy, problem with your eyes, kidney problems, heart attacks, and multiple other problems that are related to diabetes. So it was sort of a mixed result, but what they did find is that more aggressive treatment seemed to do better, but particularly for what we call microvascular disease, like retinopathy. Whereas heart attacks and strokes, not so much. So there was that question then of, okay, well, maybe we need different medications or other things for these other complications. We know if you're diabetic, you have a much higher risk for heart attack, but just controlling the sugar didn't seem to do that much. On the other hand, controlling the blood pressure in a diabetic did a lot. So I got people thinking about these things. So fast forward to the mid-1990s and the studies that we're involved with. And there was a new class of drugs called the TZDs. And the first one to come out was a drug called troglitazone or Resulin. It was developed by Park Davis and a company that we did a lot of work with. They're also the ones that developed Lipitor, by the way, atorvastatin. And this was going to be a breakthrough drug because it worked in a way that would get the liver to do the work in a way that was more consistent with the overall biological mechanism of sensitizing the body to the effects of insulin.
Right.
So people are excited about it. And Park Davis submitted this information to the Food and Drug Administration, and there was a little bit of a gruff physician at the FDA who was assigned to this, and he looked at the data, and he says, I don't like this data. We're seeing some problems with the liver with this drug. I don't think you should put this drug on the market. And so Park Davis got a little irritated by that, you can imagine. But what happened is that this guy was gruff, and at the meetings, he was swearing and saying stuff about the product and the company that were just unprintable.
Right.
And so Park Davis went to the FDA and said, you need to remove this guy from this case. Obviously, he does not have the temperament to be a regulator for the FDA, given his attitude. So the FDA went ahead and removed this guy, and they put somebody else on it. And this other person was involved and said, yeah, we'll approve it. So they approved this drug Resulin, and then it's on the market for a couple of years. And it turns out that this gruff guy was exactly right.
Wow.
Is that, in fact, it had this idiosyncratic reaction of causing very severe liver problems.
Right.
And so it got taken off the market. And some people still argue whether or not it should have been taken off the market, just put a warning, but it was basically taken off on the market. And the FDA sort of had to admit that they were cowed a little bit by a drug company. So following that, what happened is that all new diabetes drugs had to go through these additional safety measures to make sure that they were safe. And the particular concern was safety in cardiovascular patients. So if you fast forward another 10 years or so, these new drugs are coming out, and the FDA is now saying, okay, even though it does all the right things for sugar, and even though the short-term safety looks good, you need to show that these drugs are safe in heart disease patients over an extended period of time. And that's where I got involved.
Okay.
So we got involved in the study showing that you take, just random patients that have a history of diabetes and a history of heart disease, put them on these medications and make sure that things are okay. So the intent of the companies during these studies was to just show that these medications were safe in heart disease patients. But for some of the drugs, we actually found out the people that were on these medicines did much, much better. And there was a particular class called the SGLT2 inhibitors, where it was remarkable how good the outcomes were for cardiac patients. And patients with congestive heart failure that were put on these drugs were less likely to be in the hospital, less likely to have complications of heart failure, less likely to die. And then one thing led to another, and somebody said, well, maybe you don't need to have diabetes to use these drugs. So we started using these diabetic drugs in cardiac patients without diabetes, and lo and behold, we saw the same thing.
Wow.
You didn't have to treat their diabetes to make these drugs work in heart disease patients.
Wow.
So now some of these drugs are considered the cornerstone for the way we treat heart patients.
Wow. Even though it started out as a diabetes drug.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Hey, that's the voice of Dr. Michael Koren with ENCORE Docs, and we're going to talk more about clinical research and how you could potentially be a participant in clinical research right here locally, get some of the best healthcare you've ever had, be on the cutting edge of medicine here in the United States. Go to EncoreDocs.com for more information. You can also call 904-730-0166. We're going to play a song or two. We'll be back with Dr. Koren. Three Dog Night here on 103.9 WSOS. Dr. Michael Koren's with us. Like Three Dog Night at all? I mean, were they okay?
Yeah, I like them. I actually saw them. They were in Jacksonville, probably 10 years ago. And
do a pretty good show?
Yeah, it was a good show. I'm not sure what Three Dog Night means exactly.
It rolls off the tongue, though.
Yeah, it does.
And it kind of lends itself. It feels like a good band name.
Yeah.
Right? So, speaking of bands, did you get any work done yesterday, Dr. Koren, or were you just waiting to get your Taylor Swift tickets like everybody else?
So tell me about that. Someone told me that she had every slot of the top 10 from her album. It was the first time that ever happened.
First time that's ever happened
Is that
in
true?
music history and Billboard history that she did with because she released her album, right? Which, yes, they still have albums. And the top 10 single slots were owned by her for the first time ever. So that would be like the Beatles putting out the White Album and having the top 10 slots be from the White Album, which did not happen.
Right.
Or has never happened with any other group.
Well, I think it was 64, obviously 64, 65, the Beatles released a lot of stuff and they all went to number one.
Right.
But I think the most they ever had in a year was 6 number ones or something like that. Yeah.
And not at the same time.
And not at the same time, yeah.
It's actually unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, she will go down as, what is she, 33 or something?
But is it really because all 10 songs are good, or is just that everybody's downloading the songs?
Probably everybody's downloading the songs.
Okay. So,
I mean, and now that's great, Doctor, because now all the Taylor Swift fanatics are going to come and egg our vehicles by the time we get off the air.
Well, again, it's, with everything, you put a system in place, and then people think what ways of gaming the system. So
yeah, I think that's it. Well, the bigger news, of course, yesterday was she announced her tour of, I think, 40 or 50 cities. There were potentially, let's say, a couple 100,000 seats available. And of course, there were 700,000 people trying to get tickets. Crashed the Ticketmaster system for the first time ever.
Really? Wow.
Actually crashed it. And, just a lot of sad Taylor Swift fans unable to go see her live. The closest show she's doing to us at Raymond James Stadium.
Oh, wow. Isn't that interesting?
Now, there are seats that are 2 rows off the stage at Foxborough, where the Patriots play football, if you want to go see Taylor Swift there, that right now have the highest priced ticket price for on StubHub, $36,000 each.
Isn't that crazy?
So you can secure those.
Wow.
Nice outing.
Well, I have to make friends with Tom Brady in order for that to happen.
She'd have to be really good. I mean, $36,000 for what is that, a 90-minute show?
What's the face value of the tickets? Do you know?
A couple $100.
Okay.
I mean, they are on the ground. I mean, which I think are bad seats usually anyway. But not only that, acoustically, football stadiums are horrific, I think. But I've seen a concert at Raymond James. I thought it was horrible. But I guess that's not the point, right? It's about the vibe.
Yeah.
What's the most fun, large concert you've ever been to, Dr. Koren?
Well, it's an interesting question. I can answer that in different ways, but I'll just tell you the first thing that came to my mind. So when I was 17 years old, the Beach Boys played in New Jersey.
Okay.
At this big open air stadium in New Jersey. And I like the Beach Boys, I like classic rock stuff. And I was listening to it, I was getting into it. But the only reason I say that it was the best experience is that there was a young girl next to me that started getting very friendly with me, and I got to kiss her, somebody I didn't know.
Wow.
At the concert.
Wow.
And so I don't even remember any of the songs they played.
Do we know the girl's name?
I have no idea.
But that was it? You never saw each other after that?
It was sort of like a Woodstock kind of experience that I went there. There's a cute girl next to me. We're jiving a little bit, and next thing I know, we're kissing.
Yeah.
And never saw her again.
Yeah, that's interesting because we didn't have cell phones, you guys couldn't exchange numbers.
No.
Never to be seen again. Well, if you're listening out there, young lady.
Yeah, the love of my life that was lost.
Yeah, we're looking for Dr. Koren's soulmate. If you know somebody went to a Beach Boys concert, where in New Jersey?
It's like sort of the mid-state. There's an open-air arena. I'm blanking on the name, but it's called the Garden State Arts Center. Actually.
Okay, there we go.
I don't know if it was called that at that time, but it's a well-known open-air stadium. The Beach Boys played there.
Well, WSOS listeners, you now are on a mission. Find a young lady who went to that. Who, at the time, were you a doctor?
No, I was 17 years old. So.
Oh, we didn't even know you were going to be a doctor. Well, you probably didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
But it wasn't like you used that line to get her to kiss you.
Right, exactly. Well, there you go. So that's why she really loved me.
She liked you, right?
She didn't like it wasn't the position. It was really all about me.
Yeah, you could have been a bagger at the Pathmart, and it wouldn't have mattered.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Now we're very intrigued. Jackie's here with me too. That's going to be our project.
Yeah.
Dr. Michael Koren is here from ENCORE Docs, and of course, we enjoy our time with him each and every month. And also, he joins us at 8:25 every Monday morning, and we talk about some of the studies and research that seems to come out, 4 or 5 times a day. There's a new medical or health-related study out there, and he tries to help us get to the bottom, try to appreciate the facts involved. Today, we're talking about diabetes, which impacts every family, just about everybody we know. Has somebody in their circle of friends or family who is dealing with diabetes. Usually it's type 2 diabetes, but sometimes type 1 diabetes. There are some new drugs out there, though, that are helpful, right? We see them advertised on television all the time. What are some of the ones, let's talk about the studies that you're currently involved with at ENCORE Docs that could potentially help diabetes patients.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of diabetes studies, as you mentioned, and one of the questions I get with any new drug, but particularly with in the diabetes space, is, okay, doc, so this new diabetes drug, tell me about the side effects. And I'll do a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but I'll say if they ask me about a statin, I'll say the side effect is that you're going to live longer. Mm-hmm. But with some of the new diabetes drugs, I can say, well, one of the side effects of this diabetes drug is you may lose 20% of your body weight. Mm. And we have been working with this drug called tirzepatide, which is now being marketed by Eli Lilly under the name of Mounjaro. And this has now been approved for weight loss in the United States, even though it was originally developed as a diabetes drug. So it's one of those situations where there are positive side effects of drugs. And then once the manufacturers realize that there are positive side effects of drugs, they'll shift gears and start to develop the drug for that side effect, that positive side effect. So, for example, we're doing a lot of studies right now in weight loss and using some of these new drugs called GLP-1 inhibitors that help your body send a satiety signal to your brain. So it's very, very interesting science where when people are overweight, one of the problems is that they overeat. And whether or not they admit it or not, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And what prevents you from overeating? It's your satiety signal. And the satiety signal is actually a hormonal signal between your gut and your liver and your brain. And for the reasons, sometimes it gets blunted. Well, GLP-1 drugs, it stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, is actually that hormone that is responsible for sending the satiety signal. And by enhancing that signal, you'll be less likely to overeat and more likely to lose weight.
Yeah, you will feel full, right?
Exactly.
To use a common parlance. And I've also read where some of these drugs will make the foods that you really think you like a lot, if you're obsessed with chocolate pudding,
right,
and you're eating so much chocolate pudding that it gets you over your 2,000 calories a day number, it makes it where you don't really like the taste of chocolate pudding anymore. Is that true?
Well, take away the craving, and then there's like a conditioning response. So when you have it, you get this little bit of signal that I'm full, I'm a little slightly nauseated, I'm done. And then over time, that can get rid of the craving because you don't have that connection between pleasure and that particular food.
So some of these drugs that are doing those sorts of things, controlling those signals, some of the drugs we mentioned before being used for diabetes, what are the potential side effects? A lot of us think about something that we talked about off the air when you first arrived, fen-phen, right? It's sort of the famous one that people were shedding 50 pounds in 6 weeks, and then we find out that it was basically destroying your heart. So we want to make sure we don't have that again, right?
Well, it's interesting, and you make a great point. Fen-phen was very, very effective. People really lost weight. But it was only supposed to be used for 3 months. And because it was so good after 3 months, people just kept on using it. And then once they stopped using it, they gained the weight back. And it was basically an amphetamine, which speeds up your heart and does other things that are not necessarily good. But honestly, if you were healthy and just overweight, it was a reasonable choice. But what happened is that there were people that had heart conditions that were taking it, and it led to a lot of complications. And then once there are complications, then the lawyers jump in, and boom, you have a huge problem. And it was interesting because it was a Wyeth drug, which was a division of American Home Products at the time. And when the realization came that the fen-phen combination, especially over 3 months, was associated with valvular problems and pulmonary hypertension, everybody swooped in. I won't use a pejorative term, but they all swooped in. And there was, I think I remember correctly, $9 billion settlement fund.
Wow.
And then the attorneys were trying to figure out how to dole all that out.
Yeah.
So kind of interesting history.
Yeah. That's Dr. Michael Koren once again with ENCORE Docs. Getting back to what diabetes patients here in Greater St. Augustine and St. Johns County in Northeast Florida could do. Are there trials they could participate in if they have type 2 diabetes today that they might be able to participate
Absolutely.
in?
Yeah. The best thing to do is just call us, and we'll get one of our nurse recruiters, go through your story and see what's appropriate for you. Again, we're doing studies in patients who are overweight with or without diabetes. And so that's something certainly we're looking into it. We're also doing a lot of cardiovascular safety studies. So you may have diabetes, but when we learn more about you, it may turn out that you have a cholesterol problem that outweighs your diabetes. So, for example, we've talked about this lipoprotein a situation. And if you have diabetes that's under relatively good control, but your lipoprotein a is off the charts, there's no other solutions for that. There are other solutions on the market for diabetes, but not for lipoprotein a. So me looking at your situation and your best interest might suggest doing the LPA study, since there's no alternative.
Okay. That's Dr. Michael Koren once again with ENCORE Docs, and we're talking about clinical research and opportunities for you to get involved in that right here in St. Johns County and St. Augustine. You can call this number, 904-730-0166, and talk with a live human being who will guide you through the process, 904-730-0166. People that engage in these studies, if they're diabetic or if they're overweight, let me first back up a little bit on overweight. You know, sometimes when we hear, especially a doctor like yourself saying, well, people could participate if they're overweight, we tend to think really overweight, like Biggest Loser on TV, you know. But indeed, 60% of Americans are overweight.
Sure. Yeah, so every study has different criteria.
Okay.
And so ideally, you should have a body mass index somewhere between 20 and 27. And ideally between 22 and 25. But between 20 and 27 is a variability that covers most people in relatively healthy situation. When you get to 30, you're definitely overweight. When you get to 35, you're obese.
Right.
And when you get to 40 and above, you're morbidly obese. So what we tell people is, depending on what their situation is, there may be solutions that are most appropriate for them. And again, we have particular criteria for each of the programs that we're engaged in. And for the people that don't fit into those programs, we'll give them some advice. So some people need obesity surgery. There's going to be no other really alternative for them. We have historically been involved in some things to help with that. There are new devices that are being proposed to help with obesity, and we play in that space to some degree. So you never know. And if you call, even if we don't have a study that fits your needs immediately, we'll put you on the list, get you involved in our community. And when something comes up that's right for you, maybe that's the time.
Yeah. You can call 904-730-0166. That's 904-730-0166. I would say that arguably, regardless of your health status, you should make that call and just let folks, at ENCORE Docs kind of figure out what your situation is, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because you never know whether there might be an opportunity next week or down the road.
And of course, we're going into cold and flu season.
Oh, that's right. We're going to talk more about that, too, just a little bit, so stay tuned. Van McCoy here on 103.9 WSOS. The Hustle, one of the dances that Dr. Michael Koren was especially known for back in the day.
Yeah.
You remember the Hustle?
I do. I remember in 10th grade, somebody teaching me this. Debbie Wilson.
Another young lady.
Yeah.
Not the same one at the Beach Boys concert.
No.
Yeah.
This is a love that I missed out on, actually.
Another one.
And I actually knew her name. But Debbie Wilson was a very, very sweet, neat young woman who was in my class in high school. And she was dating a huge guy on the football team, and I was like a nerdy little kid. And so we got along really, really well. We were good friends, but there was always that little spark.
Yeah. And love never came to be, though. Never happened.
It did not. And it's actually a really funny story, but I would spend an hour.
Did she marry the football player? Is that how this ends?
No, she did not marry the football player.
Movie,
I would use up the rest of our time today if I went into this, but bring this up at another time.
All right. Okay. Yeah, because I don't know what it is, but Dr. Koren's life stories are always very interesting. The rest of us, lives are a little dull, but his life's been pretty interesting. Dr. Michael Koren is here with us. Of course, he's a medical doctor.
I will say, if anybody knows Debbie Wilson from Staten Island, please let me know, because she was very dear to me.
Get in touch.
She's not alive anymore. So
really?
I don't know, she passed away.
Oh, that's sad. ENCORE Docs. Before we let Dr. Koren go, we've been spending the day talking about diabetes drugs, opportunities for you, regardless of your health status, to participate in clinical research right here in St. Johns County. But let's talk briefly, because there is still the notion of the flu. We seem to be in a really bad flu season. There's RSV impacting children especially. And there are opportunities to get involved in some clinical research on those issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As you've articulated on multiple occasions, we've been extremely active in vaccine research. Vaccines save lives. We're in a horrible situation right now with RSV. Another warning just came out in St. Johns County about the severity of the RSV incidence of infection right now, particularly amongst younger people, but also very vulnerable older people also at risk. So we are actually in a crisis mode in certain infections. in Duval County, there's been a huge uptick in influenza A. And so interestingly, everybody is so relieved to not talk about COVID anymore that they're letting down their guard. But literally, I have to keep on reminding people in meetings is just because COVID isn't where it was 2 years ago doesn't mean that viruses have gone away.
Right. And
these viruses can be nasty. Mm-hmm. Again, RSV and influenza, both areas in which we're doing active research, are really, really nasty diseases.
Here, you mentioned a warning here in St. Johns County for RSV. How young are children being impacted? And, I know we mentioned obviously vulnerable seniors as well. But
well, historically, what we thought about RSV is that all kids would eventually get it, and most of them would get it by the age of 2. And it would just be a typical sort of upper respiratory infection and not necessarily the end of the world for the kids. And that was okay. It could be reactivated later in life, or you could be reinfected later in life. So these were concerns for people from a public health standpoint for people who had immune compromised states. Mm. But the latest strain of this tends to be more severe than previous strains. Mm-hmm. So because of that, people who, young kids that have asthma or other conditions can get really, really sick or even die from it.
Wow. Well, once again, we encourage you to please be careful out there. It still speaks to the value of maintaining some social distance, in certain settings, even wearing a mask.
Yeah, right? Social distance. We've had our mask conversation multiple times, but please, if you're not feeling well, wear a mask. Yeah. You're protecting other people. Again, masks are not perfect for viruses, but they are helpful. Yeah. Social distance is important, and give people the COVID handshake and wash your hands.
There you go. Before we let you go, though, there are opportunities for people to also get the flu vaccine through ENCORE, and that could be part of a clinical research. Basically, you're testing flu vaccines that could be the next generation, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So the messenger RNA technology that was so successful with COVID is now being applied to other viruses, and we're doing that work for influenza. And the neat thing about it, Kevin, is that everybody in the studies that we're doing is guaranteed to get a flu vaccine, either the traditional one or the new messenger RNA type vaccine. And we'll actually test you to make sure you're doing well with it, make sure that your immunity should be reasonably strong, and people get paid for it. Yeah. So it's a decent amount of money that people get paid for their time and effort, which we really appreciate. And it's a neat experience. And as I like to remind people, 99% of our patients who have participated in one study said they're willing to do another one.
Yeah. Well, that would include me. I've been a participant in these studies. Karen on our team has been as well. And it's some of the best healthcare, some of the best attention you're ever going to get. You're going to get healthcare professionals who actually listen to you all the time, which is nice, right? They run a great operation at ENCORE Docs. Highly recommend working with them. Learn more about the trials you could participate in, including ones for the flu vaccine at ENCOREDocs.com. ENCORE docs.com, or call 904-730-0166. That number locally, 904-730-0166. Dr. Michael Koren, we appreciate you very much, and we'll talk with you again on Monday morning, okay?
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for watching the MedEvidence podcast. To watch the rest of this series, head over to medevidence.info or subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform.